What if I told you that a quiet stretch of farmland in Missouri once hid something so monstrous, so inhuman, that even today the locals refuse to say the farmer brothers' names out loud? What if I told you that behind a weather-beaten red barn, one that looked harmless from the road, 42 women walked in, and not a single one ever walked out alive? Not because of an accident, not because of the wilderness, but because of something the farmer brothers believed. Something so twisted, so disturbing, and so methodically planned that even hardened detectives who worked the case in 1883 said it was the closest thing to hell built by human hands. For decades, families across Missouri filed missing person reports. Daughters, wives, school teachers, travelers, vanishing without a trace. What no one knew was that almost all of them had passed through the same patch of farmland, greeted by the same two smiling brothers who offered warmth, food, and safe lodging. But behind the barn doors, behind the false walls, beneath the floorboards soaked with decades of secrets, lay a nightmare factory built with a single purpose, and what those brothers did inside shattered the souls of every survivor who tried to talk about it. Tonight, on Forgotten Remains, we open the locked archives. We piece together the testimonies recovered from burnt journals. We follow the trail of bones unearthed by a freak flood that exposed the truth the brothers tried to bury forever. But I warn you, once you hear the final episode, you will never look at an old barn the same way again. So take a breath, turn your lights down, because what you are about to hear is the kind of story that doesn't just haunt your thoughts, it stalks them. Let's begin. The night the first woman disappeared, the town of Ash Hollow pretended not to hear the screams. They drifted across the cornfields just past midnight, thin, panicked, ripped apart by the wind like something the night itself was trying to swallow. People locked their doors. Parents pulled their children closer. No one stepped outside, because everyone already knew where the screams came from. The old barn on Red Lark Road. The Farmer Brothers' property, a place the locals only whispered about, and only in daylight. The Farmer Brothers, Virgil and Cyrus, were two men carved directly from the nightmares of 1883 Missouri. Towering, silent, and always watching. Men who almost never came to town, but when they did, every woman felt the back of her neck tighten like a warning from God himself. They never married. They never courted. They never even smiled. But women kept vanishing. A seamstress. A preacher's wife. A traveler passing through. A girl just 17, never seen again after delivering eggs to the farmer property. 42 women in total over 4 years, each one swallowed by the same stretch of dusty land and never spoken of again. The sheriff blamed runaways. The church blamed sin. The town blamed bad luck. Only one person refused to look away. Eleanor Briarwood, the schoolteacher who lost her sister on a rain-heavy Tuesday evening, the same day the Farmer Brothers were seen hauling something wrapped in canvas across their fields. And Eleanor was the kind of woman who didn't wait for the law. She followed the rumors. She followed the footprints. She followed the smell. God help her, the sickly, sweet smell that oozed from the barn on hot nights. Tonight, lantern in hand, she crossed the field alone. The corn scraped against her dress like bony fingers, begging her to turn back. The moon was a thin slice of bone, barely enough to paint the barn in silver, enough to reveal its warped wooden boards swollen with moisture and rot. Inside, something thumped. Not an animal, not machinery. Something heavier. Human. Struggling. And then, a sound that froze the blood in Eleanor's veins. A woman whispering, hoarse and broken. "Please, don't leave me here." Eleanor's lantern shook in her hand. Every instinct begged her to run, but she pushed the barn door open. The hinges wailed like a dying throat. And what she saw inside, the rows of iron restraints, the beds nailed into the floor, the chains arranged like cattle stalls, and the smell, God, the smell of sweat, blood, and something worse, something alive and rotting at the same time. At the far end, a shape shifted. Not the woman, something bigger, a shadow taller than any man she'd ever seen. Virgil Farmer stepped out of the dark, his face a hard slab of flesh without emotion, eyes reflecting her lantern like a predator's. He spoke with a voice that seemed too calm for the horror around them. "You shouldn't have come here, Miss Briarwood." Behind him, Cyrus appeared, carrying something. A woman, barely conscious. Barely breathing. And clearly pregnant. Eleanor's lantern flickered, because the woman wasn't pregnant from love. And she wasn't the only one. Dozens of eyes, sunken, terrified, watched Eleanor from the shadows of the barn. Women chained to the walls, bones sharp against thin skin, bellies swollen with something they never chose. 42 women, still alive, still trapped, still breeding. Eleanor backed toward the door, breath shaking, heart pounding so loud it felt like the barn itself could hear it. Virgil stepped closer. "You see too much," he whispered. "Now you stay too." Something moved behind Eleanor, something she didn't hear until it was too late. A heavy arm. A burlap sack. Darkness swallowing her whole. The barn door slammed closed, and the screams began again, but this time, nobody in Ash Hollow pretended not to hear. The rain had barely stopped when the disappearances began. At first, people in the small farming towns around Cedar Ridge, Missouri, assumed the missing women had simply run away, seeking new lives, new chances, new beginnings. It was the late 1800s, after all. Women often fled violent husbands or poverty, and the frontier swallowed them without a trace. But these vanishings were different. Too sudden. Too clean. Too perfectly timed. The first to disappear was Eleanor Pike, a 19-year-old Sunday school teacher who left home one warm August evening to deliver a basket of bread to an elderly neighbor. She never made it. The basket was later found on the dirt road, still intact, bread still warm. No footprints around it, no drag marks, nothing. A week later, Marla Jennings, a widowed seamstress known for walking home after late-night stitching work, vanished between the tailor's shack and her cabin. Locals found her sewing kit open in the middle of the road, thimbles and needles scattered as if dropped mid-step. Then 4 more women, all in the same age range, disappeared within a month. Panic spread through Cedar Ridge like infection. Families installed heavy wooden bars on their doors. Women refused to walk anywhere without a male relative. The sheriff organized night patrols, though his deputies were too few and too fearful to be effective. And yet, the disappearances continued. What the town didn't know, what the sheriff desperately tried to hide, was that a single witness had survived an encounter. A shaken farmhand named Clayton Brewer showed up at the sheriff's office one night, trembling uncontrollably, clothing ripped, smelling of mud and rotten hay. He claimed he'd heard a woman screaming near the border of the Farmer Brothers' property, a place already whispered about for its secrecy and brutality. Clayton said he'd run toward the sound, lantern swinging, only to freeze when the light revealed a large wooden wagon pulled by a pair of oxen. Standing beside the wagon were 2 massive silhouettes men, but twisted in a way that made them look almost animalistic in stance. He couldn't see their faces, but he saw something else. A woman's hand, pale and bloodied, gripping the edge of the wagon's canvas cover before another hand, much larger, dragged her back inside. Clayton ran without looking back. By dawn, he'd tried to leave town entirely, only to find the road blocked by the sheriff and several armed men. They dragged him back and forced him into silence, warning him that spreading lies about respected farmers could get him hanged. But fear has a way of leaking out, and soon, everyone whispered the same question. Why were all the missing women last seen near the Farmer Brothers' land? The 2 brothers, Thaddeus Farmer and Jonas Farmer, were reclusive giants of men, known for their strange nightly activities, their obsession with livestock breeding, and the barn on their property that no outsider was ever allowed to enter. Locals often saw a strange glow coming from that barn long after midnight, and heard sounds no animal could ever make. Something was happening inside that barn. Something the town didn't dare confront. Something waiting. Something watching. And by the time people realized the truth, 42 women had already stepped past the Farmer Brothers' property line, and not a single one had ever been seen again. The rain had stopped by the time Sheriff Alcott reached the edge of the farmer property, but the air still tasted metallic, like something had just died. The lantern in his hand trembled, not because of fear, but because of the wind that rushed across the empty cornfields like a warning whispered too late. He wasn't alone. A woman, barefoot, drenched, shivering violently, was crouched near the broken fence line. Mud caked her arms, her torn dress was barely clinging to her, and her eyes were wild, darting, unfocused, as if she hadn't yet returned from whatever nightmare she had escaped. Alcott knelt in front of her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" At first she didn't respond. Then her lips parted just a little, and the faintest breath escaped. "They're still in there." Alcott leaned closer. "Who? Who's still in there?" Her jaw locked. Her entire body convulsed with a choked sound, half cry, half scream. "The other women," she whispered. "They keep them in the barn. You can't hear them unless the wind hits just right." Alcott's stomach tightened. He scanned the silent horizon. The farmer barn stood dark and motionless at the far end of the property, but something about the structure felt wrong. Like the building itself was breathing. "Tell me what happened," Alcott urged. The woman swallowed. Her hands moved up slowly, trembling as they touched her throat, revealing deep bruises in the shape of fingers. "They don't kill you on the first night," she said shakily. "They test you." Alcott felt a cold rush down his spine. "Who tests you?" Her voice broke into a hoarse whisper. "The brothers." She looked up at him suddenly, eyes widening as if a memory stabbed her from the inside. "They don't talk. They don't laugh. They just choose. One of them holds you. The other inspects you. And then they decide if you're useful." Her breathing quickened. Her hands clutched her stomach as if protecting herself from a nightmare still touching her. "And the barn," she continued, her voice cracking. "The barn is louder on the second night. That's when the screaming starts." Alcott's lantern flickered. "What's inside the barn?" he asked. For the first time, she fully looked at him, her face pale, streaked with dried tears, but her voice suddenly flat, empty, as if she had accepted she was already dead. "You won't believe me. Try me," he said firmly. Her answer made the sheriff's skin crawl. "They have rooms under the barn. Small rooms. No windows. Only chains." She took a shuddering breath. "And they don't just keep women down there. They breed them." The lantern flame wavered violently. Alcott blinked. "What did you say?" She leaned forward, gripping his coat with a desperation born from pure terror. "They take the newborns away, Sheriff. The babies don't stay with the mothers. They go someplace else. I heard them crying in another room. And once the women can't give them what they want anymore." She stopped, as if saying the words might summon the brothers back. Alcott steadied her shoulders. "What happens to the women after that?" Her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "They disappear." The fields around them fell completely silent. No wind. No crickets. No distant animals. Silence that felt intentional. Then the woman's voice dropped into a trembling whisper. "I wasn't supposed to get out. One of the chained women helped me. She distracted them. She screamed until they went to check on her." Alcott froze. "Why would she do that for you?" "Because she knew I was the only one small enough to fit through the crawl tunnel behind the stall doors," the woman said. "She wanted someone to tell the world what's happening here." She wiped her face with a shaking hand. "But before I escaped, she told me something. Something horrible." Alcott leaned in. "What did she say?" The woman stared past him toward the barn, toward the black, silent building that looked like it was holding its breath. "She said the brothers aren't working alone." Alcott straightened. "What do you mean?" The woman pointed toward the barn with a trembling finger. "There's someone else in there. Someone worse than them. Someone who tells them what to do." Her next words hit him like a punch. She called him the Father Maker. Alcott felt the blood drain from his face. "The who?" The woman shut her eyes, shaking her head as tears finally slipped free. "He's the reason they take women. He's the reason they take the babies. He's the reason no one ever comes out, except me." Alcott stood slowly. The barn seemed to loom larger now, as if it was aware he was coming. The woman grabbed his arm. "You can't go in there alone, Sheriff. He's not human. None of them are." Alcott looked back at her, tightening his grip on the lantern. "Someone has to." She began to sob, clutching handfuls of the muddy ground. "He'll hear you," she whispered. "He always hears." Alcott took one step toward the barn, then another. The woman's final whisper followed him like a curse carried on the wind. "The Father Maker is waiting for you." The morning after the sheriff's quiet disappearance, the town of Coldridge Hollow felt wrong. Too still. Too hushed. Even the wind moved like it was afraid to speak. And while the rest of the town tried to scrape normalcy out of their routine, one person couldn't shake what she had seen the previous night. Her name was Martha Hale, a 28-year-old widow who lived alone at the far edge of the wheat fields, fields that bordered the Farmer Brothers' land. For months, she'd ignored the strange sights near the barn. She'd convinced herself she never heard the late-night cries. She forced herself to believe the silhouettes she'd glimpsed at dusk were just shadows. But the previous night, she had seen something that shattered every lie she had told herself. She saw a woman stumbling through the wheat, barefoot, blood-streaked, her dress shredded like she'd crawled through barbed wire. At first, Martha thought it was a drunk wanderer. But as the woman collapsed only 30 yards from her porch, Martha ran out with her lantern. When the light touched the woman's face, Martha froze. Her skin was pale as ash, her lips cracked and bleeding, her hair tangled and ripped out in clumps, and on her wrists, fresh shackles wounds. The woman tried to speak, but only a rasp came out like her throat had been scraped raw. Martha knelt beside her, whispering, "It's all right. You're safe now." But the woman shook her head violently, eyes wide with a terror Martha had never seen in another human being. Then she finally forced out a whisper, each word cutting through the night like a blade. "They're coming for me." Before Martha could ask who, the woman let out a scream. A scream so sharp and tortured it felt like the air itself recoiled. Not from pain, not from fear, but from recognition. They were already here. Through the waving wheat, Martha saw them, two figures, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. Even from the distance, Martha saw the unmistakable outline of their heads. The Farmer Brothers. Elijah, the older one. Jonas, the quieter but far more brutal one. Their boots didn't crunch the wheat stalks. They glided through them, like they'd walked that path 1,000 times. The woman on the ground sobbed and clutched at Martha's dress. "Please, don't let them take me back. Please." Martha's heart hammered. Her mind screamed run, but her body locked in place. Then Elijah spoke, his voice low, almost polite. "Evening, Miss Hale. We'll be taking her back now." Martha swallowed hard. She forced enough courage into her voice to speak. "She needs help. Look at her. You can't treat a person like..." Jonas stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the lantern light. "She ain't a person to you, Miss Hale. Ain't your concern. Ain't your business." Elijah bent down and grabbed the woman by her hair, softly at first, almost lovingly, then yanked her up with a vicious snap. The woman screamed again, the sound ripping into the wheat field. Martha reached out instinctively. Her hand brushed Elijah's sleeve. He turned slowly. Martha felt something cold crawl down her spine. His eyes didn't look human. They looked hollow. Dead. Like someone wearing a man's skin. Then he leaned close enough for her to smell the stale blood on his breath. "Miss Hale, you saw too much tonight," Jonas whispered behind her. "Much too much." Martha froze. Her lantern shook in her hands. Elijah let out a soft whistle, and 3 large shapes emerged from the darkness behind him. Not men, not boys, something else. Something that moved on all 4s at first, then stood upright, their limbs too long, their posture crooked, their eyes gleaming like animals. Creatures? Mutations? Victims? Martha couldn't tell, but they obeyed the Farmer brothers like trained dogs. Elijah smiled, a thin, cold slice of a smile. "You'll be coming with us now." Martha dropped the lantern and ran. Her bare feet tore across the field. The wheat slashed at her legs. Her lungs burned. Behind her, she heard the inhuman shrieks and pounding footsteps of the things that chased her. And above them all, the calm, steady footsteps of Elijah and Jonas. Not rushing, not panicking, just walking, knowing she would never outrun them. Because no one ever had. Because everyone who ran from the Farmer brothers always ended up back inside the barn. And Martha Hale, the only witness to see a victim escape, was now their next target. The storm had finally broken above the farm, lightning tearing open the night sky while rain hammered against the warped barn roof like fists begging to be let in. Deep inside the structure, the women huddled beneath the floor, their breaths shallow, listening, waiting, praying. But this night, something else was listening too. Hannah was the first to hear it. A faint sound, almost too small, too weak, too fragile to be real, rose from the far corner of the underground holding room. A slow scrape, then a soft thud, followed by a breathy whisper that did not belong to any of the imprisoned women. "Is someone there?" The voice was faint, female, but broken, like every syllable had been dragged across glass. The women froze. No one answered. They all knew that voice was not one of theirs. Hannah, trembling, lifted the rusted lantern she had stolen from the wall hours earlier. The flame flickered in the damp, stale air. Shadows quivered, stretching like hands across the packed dirt. Another whisper. "I'm still here." The women nearly screamed. Hannah gripped the lantern tighter and slowly approached the sound, stepping between rusted chains, torn clothing, and dark stains soaked deep into the floor. When she reached the far wall, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A narrow gap. A thin vertical seam of old wood. And cold air breathing through it. A door. A hidden door. She swallowed hard, leaned in and whispered, "Who's inside?" Silence. Then, a fingernail scraped down the other side of the wooden panel. Hannah stumbled back. The others gathered around, whispering frantic warnings. "Don't open it." What if it's one of the brothers? What if they hid something worse in there? Lightning flashed through the cracks in the floorboards above them. The thunder shook dust from the rafters. And that voice, that impossibly thin, tortured voice, spoke again. "They left me down here long before they brought you." The air went still. The women turned pale, because the implications were horrifying. Someone had been trapped long before them. Someone the brothers didn't even bother to feed, move, or check on anymore. Someone who had survived, barely, by unknown means. Hannah, terrified but determined, stepped forward again. "If I open..." The storm had finally broken above the farm, lightning tearing open the night sky while rain hammered against the warped barn roof like fists begging to be let in. Deep inside the structure, the women huddled beneath the floor, their breaths shallow, listening, waiting, praying. But this night, something else was listening too. Hannah was the first to hear it. A faint sound, almost too small, too weak, too fragile to be real, rose from the far corner of the underground holding room. A slow scrape, then a soft thud, followed by a breathy whisper that did not belong to any of the imprisoned women. "Is someone there?" The voice was faint, female, but broken, like every syllable had been dragged across glass. The women froze. No one answered. They all knew that voice was not one of theirs. Hannah, trembling, lifted the rusted lantern she had stolen from the wall hours earlier. The flame flickered in the damp, stale air. Shadows quivered, stretching like hands across the packed dirt. Another whisper. "I'm still here." The women nearly screamed. Hannah gripped the lantern tighter and slowly approached the sound, stepping between rusted chains, torn clothing, and dark stains soaked deep into the floor. When she reached the far wall, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A narrow gap. A thin vertical seam of old wood. And cold air breathing through it. A door. A hidden door. She swallowed hard, leaned in and whispered, "Who's inside?" Silence. Then, a fingernail scraped down the other side of the wooden panel. Hannah stumbled back. The others gathered around, whispering frantic warnings. Don't open it. What if it's one of the brothers? What if they hid something worse in there? Lightning flashed through the cracks in the floorboards above them. The thunder shook dust from the rafters. And that voice, that impossibly thin, tortured voice, spoke again. They left me down here long before they brought you. The air went still. The women turned pale, because the implications were horrifying. Someone had been trapped long before them. Someone the brothers didn't even bother to feed, move, or check on anymore. Someone who had survived, barely, by unknown means. Hannah, terrified but determined, stepped forward again. If I open this, are you going to hurt us? A ragged breath. A sickening cough. Then, no, but I need you to know. They won't let any of you leave. The women looked at one another, fear turning their limbs cold. Then came the worst sound yet. A second voice. Male. Right behind the first. She's right. Hannah jumped back so fast she dropped the lantern. The flames sputtered but stayed alive. Two voices. A man and a woman. Both trapped inside that hidden room. Both waiting. What's in there? Hannah whispered. The woman answered. A punishment place for anyone who tries to run. Then the man added, whispering with a cracked, unnatural rasp. But we didn't just try to run. We saw something. Something they never wanted anyone to see. Hannah's heartbeat thrashed in her ears. What did you see? Silence stretched until the man spoke again. We saw what the Farmer brothers buried under this barn and why they're really collecting women. Hannah's blood turned to ice. The lantern guttered. A hinge clicked. The hidden door shifted, an inch, then two, as if something inside was pushing it open. The women scrambled back, their backs hitting the opposite wall. The door creaked wider. A pale hand slowly reached through, skin loose, fingers bone-thin, nails cracked and yellowed. Then the woman's face appeared in the gap, sunken, starved, eyes hollow yet burning with the memory of nightmares. You need to run, she whispered, because the brothers aren't human anymore. And as she stepped fully into the flickering lantern light, the women finally saw what starvation had tried and failed to hide. Deep bite marks along her shoulders, circular scars along her spine, and a collar forged from something that was not metal but bone. Human bone. Before Hannah could speak, the man inside the hidden room began screaming, an animalistic, blood-curdling howl that echoed through the entire underground chamber, shaking the rusted chains. Footsteps thundered above. Heavy. Fast. Multiple. The Farmer brothers coming down the stairs. And the starving woman whispered one last sentence. They're coming to finish what they started. The storm had finally stopped, but the barn felt darker than ever. A heavy, wet silence hung in the air, like the world outside had drowned and only this place remained. Elise sat against the wall, her wrists raw from the rope. Her breathing was shallow. She knew dawn was coming, but she also knew dawn meant they would come too. The Farmer brothers always worked at sunrise. Always. But something else woke her that morning. Not footsteps. Not chains rattling. Not the creak of the barn door. It was scratching, soft at first. Like a nail dragging gently across wood. She held her breath. S-C-R-R-R. 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 It was coming from the floorboards beneath her. Elise crawled closer, pressing her ear to the ground. The wood was cold, so cold it stung. The scratching continued, rhythmic, desperate. Then a whisper rose up through the slits between the boards. Is someone still alive up there? Elise recoiled, heart exploding in her chest. The voice was female, weak, trembling, almost gone. She forced herself to whisper back. Yes, yes, I'm here. Who are you? A dry breath. Then, one of the ones they didn't finish. Elise's blood froze. Not killed, not buried, not finished. The scratching continued, small and frantic. I'm under the boards, the woman whispered. In the crawl space. I've been hiding for 2 days. I heard them take the others. I heard everything. They think I'm dead. Elise swallowed hard. Why didn't you get out? I tried, the woman gasped, voice cracking. But there's something down here with me. The barn door groaned open. Elise jolted back, wiping dirt off the floor with her sleeve to hide the secret. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Almost savoring their own sound. It was Harlan, the older Farmer brother. His boots were muddy up to the knees. That always meant he had been digging, either burying something or making room for something new. Awake already? He said with that sickening smile. Good. Today's a busy day. Elise kept her eyes down. She knew better than to answer. Harlan stopped right where the scratching had been seconds earlier. Elise prayed the girl beneath them had stopped breathing entirely. Harlan pressed his boot into the floorboard. Hard. Testing. The wood bent with a groan. He frowned. Bent down. knocked 3 times on the plank. Elise felt tears burning at the edges of her eyes, but the floor stayed silent. After a long moment, Harlan straightened up. "Good," he muttered. "No more surprises." He walked away to unhook tools from the wall. Ropes, hooks, long iron rods that glinted sharp in the morning light. Elise's hands shook. She risked a whisper as his back turned. "Are you still there?" She breathed downward. A faint, trembling reply seeped up. "Please, don't let them put me back in the pit." Elise felt her heart break, and then steel itself. She made a promise, quiet and determined. "I won't. I'll get us both out." But survival in this place wasn't earned through promises. It was earned through blood, and the Farmer brothers were already choosing who would bleed next. The night after the sheriff sealed the farm, a storm rolled over Missouri. Black clouds, violent winds, and thunder that shook the earth like something buried beneath it wanted out. But the storm wasn't what terrified the cleanup crew. It was what they found under the barn. When the boards were ripped from the floor, an opening revealed a stone stairway, the kind that wasn't on any map, deed, or blueprint. The stench that climbed out was thick, warm, and rotten, as if the air itself remembered every scream that had ever echoed below. 2 deputies entered first. They descended slowly, lanterns trembling in their hands. Dust swirled in the narrow passage, and shallow scratch marks ran along the walls, too many to count. The deeper they went, the colder it got, until the flame of one lantern burned blue. That was when they realized the stone steps weren't just steps. They were graves. Every few feet, the wall had been carved out just enough to hold a body. Some were wrapped in canvas. Some weren't. Some were curled in the fetal position as if they died, trying to make themselves small. Every skull looked cracked, like someone had been tapping on the bones to see what was inside. But the worst part wasn't the bodies, it was the door. A rusted iron door stood at the bottom of the stairway with 5 separate locks, each one engraved with crude initials, FB. The Farmer brothers. Each lock was shaped like a nail, each handle stained with dried, almost black fingerprints. No one wanted to open it, but someone had to. When the final bolt slid free, the door creaked open, revealing a chamber almost untouched by time. Chains hung from the ceiling like metallic vines. Leather straps lined the walls. And in the center, a wooden birthing chair, but not the kind found in medical facilities. This one had long scratches down the armrests, deep grooves where fingers had dug in and ripped splinters free. The footrest was stained completely brown. The head brace still had hair tangled in the hinges. There were notebooks scattered everywhere, drawings, cycles, and lists. Each page documented women the brothers had brought in. Their ages, their physical strength, how long they lasted before they broke. Some pages were smeared. Some were torn. Some had fingerprints of someone desperately trying to erase their own existence. A deputy knelt down and picked up a photograph. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped it. It showed a woman, eyes swollen, hands tied, mouth open mid-screaming, being forced onto the chair. On the back of the photo, written in pencil, "She fought the longest." But they all break. Lightning cracked outside. The chamber shook, and that was when something moved in the darkness behind the chair. A soft shuffle. A faint dragging sound, followed by a breath. Wet, broken, human. The deputies froze. The lantern light flickered over a corner of the room, illuminating something curled up behind a stack of crates. Someone who had survived behind the wall for God knows how long. Bones visible through skin, eyes reflecting the light like an animal, hands trembling as if begging for help or warning them to run. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. And then, she lifted her finger and pointed upward toward the barn floor, toward the storm-lit night above, toward something waiting for them. The Farmer brothers' horror wasn't over. It was waking up. The storm outside hammered the old barn roof like fists begging to be let in. Deep beneath the structure, far below the creaking floorboards and the rusted pens, lay the place the Farmer brothers never allowed their victims to glimpse. A place even most of their prisoners didn't know existed. A place carved in secret, sealed in dirt and built for one purpose. And when Clara awoke there, she realized she wasn't supposed to be alive. Her eyes opened to pitch blackness. Not darkness, absence. There was no flame, no candle, no moonlight. Only the weight of earth pressing on every side. The air tasted metallic, old, suffocating. She tried moving her hands. Chains. Her feet. Chains. But her head, resting on something soft, something warm. Clara froze. She wasn't alone. A wet breath touched her ear, too close, too human. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have screamed." The voice was weak, female, strained, pain-racked. Clara swallowed hard. "WH, who are you?" The unseen girl exhaled shakily. "One of the ones who tried to run." "Down here, They put the failures. Clara's heart pounded wildly. She heard another sound, the dragging shuffle of more bodies in restraints. More breathing, more women. Some crying. Some too dehydrated to speak. Others muttering incoherently, their minds shattered. The girl beside her whispered again. They'll come soon. When the torchlight hits, don't look them in the eyes. They like that. Then, from above them, came the metal groan of a hatch sliding open. A thin blade of orange light sliced through the darkness. Footsteps descended the wooden ladder like a slow countdown. One step. Another. Another. Clara's breath stopped when she saw the boots. Then the lantern. Then the face. Ethan Farmer. But he was not smiling today. His expression was cold, empty, as though whatever humanity he once had was buried deeper than the cellar itself. He scanned the chained women with the dead calm of someone inspecting livestock. Quiet night, he muttered. Good. Quiet means obedient. Clara's pulse hammered so loudly she feared he could hear it. Ethan knelt beside the woman next to her, lifted her chin with 2 fingers. You again, he said softly. Didn't like the upstairs accommodations, huh? Thought you could bite me and get away with it? The woman trembled violently. Clara wanted to scream, but Ethan had not yet looked at her. Maybe he didn't know she was awake. But then, his lantern paused and slowly tilted toward Clara's face. Their eyes met, and Ethan smiled. A horrible, satisfied smile. Well, look who finally woke up. He traced the lantern glow up her neck like he was studying butcher meat. You almost died on the table, Clara. Would have been a real shame. We need you alive. Clara's blood turned to ice. Ethan leaned closer, voice dropping into a whisper colder than the cellar walls. Down here is where we break the strong ones. He reached to unlock her chains. But before his fingers touched the metal, a roar of thunder shook the barn, and something upstairs slammed hard enough to make dust rain from the ceiling. Ethan paused. Another sound followed. Not thunder, not wind. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Running. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Nathan. He stood abruptly, lantern swinging. Clara felt the girl beside her flinch. This is bad, the girl whispered. When they fight, someone always dies. Ethan stomped up the ladder, slamming the hatch above them. A suffocating silence followed. Then, a crash. A shout. The snapping of wood. A scream. One of the brothers, unmistakably. The prisoners began to sob and pray in the dark. Clara, still chained, listened with every fiber of her being. Something was happening. Something the brothers had feared. And she realized, whatever was upstairs, whatever had finally breached the barn, it wasn't human. The night after Deputy Wade disappeared, something strange happened on the Coleman property. People in town said they could feel the change, like a sudden drop in temperature that had no business happening in late July, Missouri. By dawn, a heavy gray fog had rolled across the farmlands, so thick it swallowed entire fence lines. And right in the center of that fog stood the old barn, darker than usual. The townsfolk didn't know it yet, but Clara, one of the missing girls, had been awake inside that barn the entire night, listening to something move behind the walls. Not someone. Something. Clara's realization. Clara had learned to recognize the footsteps of the 2 farmer brothers, Samuel and Elijah. Their boots were heavy, deliberately slow, like they wanted the women to hear them coming. But tonight, Clara didn't hear boots. She heard skin. Bare, wet skin dragging and scraping along the wooden beams. Sometimes it crawled. Sometimes it stood upright, breathing through the cracks in the walls, making the lantern flame flicker as if the barn itself had exhaled. Clara covered her mouth, trying to keep quiet. The other women, chained nearby, trembled just like she did. One asked in a whisper, "Did they bring in an animal?" Clara shook her head. It wasn't an animal. Animals didn't whisper back. She pressed her ear to the plank beside her. Something on the other side whispered, "Hungry." Samuel Farmer's midnight ritual. Around midnight, Samuel finally returned. His shirt was torn. His hair was wet with sweat. But the strangest thing, he didn't come alone. He was carrying a bucket of fresh blood, still warm, steaming in the cool night air. The women froze. Samuel dipped his hand in the bucket and smeared the blood along the inside of the barn walls, tracing symbols none of them recognized. Symbols that looked older than English, older than scripture, older than anything humans should know. Then Samuel muttered, "It needs feeding." And from behind the wall came a slow, eager inhale, like a starving thing taking in the smell of a feast. Elijah stood behind him, clutching a rope tied to something hidden under a heavy tarp. That something kept shaking violently, trying to free itself. Samuel nodded. Elijah pulled the tarp away. Underneath was a hog, but not like any hog they'd seen before. Its eyes were gone. Its legs were broken, and someone had carved the same ancient symbols into its flesh. The women started screaming. Samuel shouted, "Silence!" Then he dragged the hog to the far corner. The wall split open, not with hinges, not like a door, but like something alive peeling itself apart. A black, wet arm reached through. It grabbed the hog, pulled it inside, and the hog's squeal was cut off like a rope snap. Blood splattered across the floor in a single violent burst. Clara fainted. The barn moved. When Clara woke up, the lanterns were out, but she could still hear it. The same dragging sound, except now it was above them, on the rafters. Then the roof groaned, the beams twisting like tendons, shaking dust down on the women. Someone cried, "The barn is alive!" Clara whispered back, "No, not alive, possessed." She didn't know by what, but she knew this. Whatever the Farmer brothers had awakened, whatever they were feeding, whatever lived inside those walls now, it wasn't done, and it was still hungry. For 3 days, the local search party circled the abandoned barn ruins. Dogs barked at empty corners. The wind carried a low, rotten smell, but no one could find the source. Everyone assumed it was just old, wet timber. But on the night of August 17th, something shifted. A man named Jacob Allen, one of the volunteers, returned alone. He couldn't explain it, but something was pulling him back. An itch under his skin, a whisper in the grain of the barn's shattered walls. The moon was low, a swollen orange disk bleeding through the trees as he stepped inside. The barn groaned like it was alive. He clicked on his lantern, sweeping it slowly across the warped beams and blackened soil. Everything looked the same as before, until he noticed a corner of the floor that looked too clean. The boards there weren't rotting. They were newer, hammered in place with precision. Someone had sealed something. Jacob kneeled, brushing away the dust. The wood beneath his hand felt warm. Human warm. Then he heard it, a faint tap-tap-tap from beneath the floor. His breath hitched. He leaned closer. The tapping turned into scratching. The scratching turned into a desperate raking. Jacob stumbled back. "Is someone?" The floorboards shuddered under his boots as if someone slammed their fists from the other side. He ran, but before he reached the exit, another sound rose, something soft, breathy, and impossibly close. "Don't leave me." They said they'd come back. The voice belonged to a woman. Jacob froze. Lantern shaking in his hands, he slowly turned. The floorboards he had uncovered were now buckling upward, one nail at a time prying itself loose like invisible hands were forcing a way out. Then everything stopped. Silence. Until the final nail shot from the wood with a sharp metallic ping, the board flipped open, and the smell hit him. A choking wave of rot, old blood, and something that should never have been alive long enough to decompose. He raised his lantern over the opening. Inside the hidden crawlspace was not one body, but several, stacked, knotted together, tangled like they had died trying to climb over one another. Their faces were frozen in agony, mouths stretched open in silent, endless screams. Jacob could not move. And then, one of the bodies blinked. Her cracked lips trembled as she rasped. "They kept us for breeding. They said we weren't allowed to die." Jacob collapsed backward, scrambling away, lantern swinging wildly. The woman reached upward, not to grab him but to point past him. Toward the barn door, Jacob turned. 2 tall silhouettes stood blocking the exit. Long coats, broad shoulders, wide, unnatural grins. The Farmer brothers, but they had died in 1883, yet here they were, alive, whole, and smiling with a hunger that had never faded. "Come on back," one of them crooned. "We ain't finished with you yet." The lantern slipped from Jacob's hand and shattered. The barn went dark. Jacob never walked out again. The Missouri State Archive report from 1883 mentioned walls covered in strange hash marks, almost like someone had tried to count days or victims. But the official papers didn't tell the whole story. The real truth came from Lucy Albright, one of the last women who ever escaped the Farmer brothers' breeding barn, barely able to stand, half-starved, and shaking so violently the sheriff thought she was dying. When she was finally able to speak, she described something investigators never published. She said the walls weren't just marked. They were carved. Deep, violent scratches, some made by fingernails, some by knives, some by teeth. Each line represented a failed escape attempt, or worse, an attempt that succeeded only for the brothers to drag the woman back inside. Lucy said the barn was divided into 3 long corridors. Each woman was kept in a separate chained stall, but they were close enough to hear each other scream. And according to her, the 3rd corridor was the one no woman ever survived long enough to leave. Because in the 3rd corridor, the Farmer brothers kept their favorites. Women they believed were chosen. Women they claimed were meant to produce strong bloodlines. They bragged about it to each other. Lucy heard them through the floorboards as she pretended to be unconscious. She said the brothers would walk the halls at night with lanterns, whispering to the women in soft, gentle voices. Sweet like a lullaby, promising food, water, warmth, protection. before ripping everything away the moment a woman trusted them. Lucy said that was the game the brothers loved most: hope. Giving it, taking it, breaking it, until the woman was too scared to even blink without permission. But the detail that chilled investigators, something they hid from the public, was what Lucy described next. She said the walls didn't just have scratches. They had names. Names carved so desperately that the letters shook and trembled. Names of women the public never knew about. Women who were never reported missing. Women whose families never looked for them. One name, however, was carved over and over, deeper than all the others. Lucy said it appeared 47 times throughout the barn. Abigail. When asked who Abigail was, Lucy broke down violently, screaming until she passed out. It took her 3 days to calm enough to explain. Abigail wasn't one woman. It wasn't a name. It was a title the Farmer brothers gave to every woman they decided to prepare for the upper loft. A place Lucy said no woman ever returned from. She said she heard the brothers dragging one Abigail after another up the creaking ladder, followed by muffled struggling, whispered prayers, a single choking gasp, and then silence so heavy the whole barn seemed to sink. Lucy said the brothers always came down smiling, always dusting off their hands, always satisfied. Investigators locked the barn after the rescue, but when they later returned to collect evidence, they discovered something terrifying. A new set of scratch marks carved on the inside of the loft door. Marks that weren't there during the rescue. Marks that spelled a single word: help. But no one had been inside between the rescue and the investigation. No one alive, at least. And the dust on the loft floor had only 2 sets of footprints. One belonging to a sheriff, the other barefoot, smaller, feminine, and completely unexplainable. The storm outside had grown so violent that the windows of the barnhouse rattled like bones shaken in a wooden cup. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the walls of the farmhouse for only a fraction of a second, but long enough for the survivors hiding inside to realize something was wrong. Very wrong, because the shadows no longer matched the furniture. They were moving. Eliza noticed it first. She whispered, trembling, "They're under the floor. I can hear them. Something's crawling." Everyone froze. There, beneath the rotting planks, came a soft dragging, like bare skin sliding against dry wood. Slow, heavy, determined. The women pressed their backs against the wall as the sound moved directly beneath them, pacing the length of the room as if tracking. A thunderclap cracked open the sky. The floorboards lifted. A long, pale arm shot out from between the planks. A human arm, but stretched, discolored, and horribly thin, as if starved for years. The fingers clawed at the surface, searching, feeling, learning. Another arm appeared. Then a face emerged. A woman's face, but ruined, sunken, with eyes so hollow they looked carved out. She didn't blink. She simply stared, as though recognizing prey. Eliza gasped. She's one of them, one of the missing. But there was something unnatural about the woman, something twisted. As she dragged herself up through the floor, they saw her body was wrong. Her spine bent in ways that defied anatomy. And her legs had been broken and reset backward. The Farmer brothers had remade her. Lightning flashed again, and the room filled with movement. Hands burst from the floorboards. Faces appeared. Crawling bodies, disfigured, starving, eyes glowing with a sick, animal hunger. The barn wasn't only where the Farmer brothers kept their victims. It was where they changed them. The survivors stumbled back, screaming as the creatures pulled themselves up and out of the floor like the dead rising. Their breath was ragged, fast, desperate. These women were no longer fully human, but they were still alive, and they were angry. One crawled impossibly fast across the wall, spider-like, reaching for Clara's ankle. Another slammed her head repeatedly against a support beam, cracking it open just to climb through the gap. The survivors bolted for the stairway, but halfway there the smell hit them. Rot, mold, old blood, and then footsteps. Not crawling, not broken, calm, heavy, confident. Someone else was in the house. Someone walking. Someone normal. A voice drifted through the hall. Smooth, quiet, disturbingly cheerful. I see the girls finally woke up. It was one of the Farmer brothers. Alive. And he wasn't alone. The storm broke over the abandoned barn like a warning. Rain hammered the warped roof, lightning ripped across the sky, and in that flicker of white-blue light, something moved above the rafters. Tom froze. He had finally reached the attic, a claustrophobic crawl space above the main chamber, hidden behind false boards the Farmer brothers built to keep their special rooms out of sight. The air was stale, thick, wet, and colder than anything below. He could barely breathe. As he pushed forward, his lantern cast a trembling circle of light on the rotten beams. And that's when he saw them. Scratches. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all carved frantically into the ceiling wood by bare fingers, deep enough to splinter the planks. Fingernails lay embedded like broken teeth. Some marks formed words. Some were just wild lines. But one set stood out, because it was written with perfect clarity. "They come at night." Tom's stomach lurched. His lantern guttered, almost dying. Then, something skittered across the ceiling above him. Not a rat, not an animal. Something heavier. Something deliberate. Something crawling. He lifted the lantern just a little, and another flash of lightning exploded outside. In that flash, he saw her, pressed flat between the roof beams, body twisted unnaturally, hair hanging down like wet rope. A woman, or what used to be one. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown out, face pale and stretched as if she had been screaming for days. Her limbs, impossibly long, her fingers splintered to the bone. She shouldn't have been alive. And yet, her head snapped downward, looking straight at him. Tom stumbled back as her mouth opened, wider and wider, until her jaw split in a way that no human jaw should. A sound came out. Not a scream, not a moan, but the scraping rasp of wood being clawed again. Tom ran, but as he scrambled toward the attic hatch, more sounds erupted above him. The ceiling bulged. Boards cracked. Dust rained down. There were more of them. Dozens. Crawling. Skittering. Following. Lightning flashed again, and Tom saw their hands punching through the boards. Grabbing, reaching, clawing for him with broken, bloodless fingers. He shoved the hatch open and fell through it, crashing onto the floor below. He didn't even feel the pain. He just ran, sprinting across the barn with the storm roaring around him. Behind him, something dropped from the attic. Then another. Then many. Soft thuds on the dirt floor. Something whispered his name. Another voice giggled. Another cried. Then a chorus began, ragged, breathless, desperate. "Don't leave us. Don't leave us. Don't leave us." Tom burst through the barn doors and stumbled into the muddy yard, gasping, soaked, terrified. He turned back only once. The barn door stood wide open. Lightning split the sky, and in that split second he saw dozens of pale faces peering from the darkness inside, watching him, waiting, and every single one of them had that same carved message scratched onto their skin. "They come at night." When the sheriff's team pried open the rotting wooden hatch beneath the barn, the smell hit them first. Sweet, wet decay mixed with something far worse. Their lanterns reached down the narrow steps, and the light exposed claw marks on the stone walls, long and deep, as if made by desperate hands. Inside the cramped cellar, rusted chains hung from ceiling beams. Small cloth scraps lay scattered, pieces of dresses, torn bonnets, and strips of hair ribbon. But the most terrifying discovery was the journal hidden behind a loose brick. Inside it, in shaky handwriting, one of the women had written, "They are not human, not anymore." Their mother changed them. Old townsfolk had whispered for years that the Farmer brothers' mother, Margaret Farmer, practiced something ancient, older than Missouri, older than the church, older than the land itself. When she died, the brothers sealed her room and refused to speak of her. But the sheriff's men kicked open that door. Dust swirled like fog. The walls were covered in crude drawings, female figures, wombs, children without mouths, and symbols painted with what looked like blood. Her bed was untouched, as if someone had been lying in it until very recently. The blankets were indented, warm, and carved into the wood of her dresser, "The line must continue." At sunset, when the fog thickened over the fields, the deputies heard women crying. Soft at first, then louder, but when they followed the sound into the cornfield, they found no one. Only rows of corn swaying even though there was no wind. Then, one deputy screamed he had found bones, not buried, planted, standing upright like stalks. Their fingers stretched upward like they had desperately tried to pull themselves out before death. And from deeper in the field came a low, guttural moan. Something was still alive. Just when the sheriff believed the nightmare was over, they heard footsteps behind the barn. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The Farmer brothers, thought to be dead, were standing at the tree line. But something had changed in their faces. Their eyes were too wide, their necks too long, and their smiles twisted unnaturally. In their hands they carried farm hooks, dripping fresh blood. They whispered in unison. "Mother said the harvest isn't finished." During the chaotic chase, one deputy tripped over a patch of soft earth. When lanterns were brought closer, the ground collapsed slightly. A burial pit. Huge. Unmarked. The first layer contained bones, but the layers beneath held bodies, recent ones. Women still wearing torn dresses, some with rope burns, some with broken fingernails from trying to escape. But the deepest layer didn't contain bodies at all. It held bundled cloth sacks, each one squirming slightly. When a sack tore open, something small inside hissed and crawled back into the dirt. The deputies dropped their lanterns and ran. The final locked room in the barn was opened only when a deputy shot the padlock off. Inside were iron cages arranged in a circle. In the center of that circle was a stone bowl filled with blackened liquid and hair. Carved into the floor, in perfect circles, were symbols matching those found in the mother's room. But one symbol, the innermost, was smeared with fresh blood. Someone had been inside that room recently. Very recently. Then they noticed the walls, covered with names. 42 women. Every one of them crossed out, except the last two, meaning they were still alive somewhere. And that meant the brothers hadn't returned for revenge. They returned to finish the ritual. The sheriff gathered every man still alive and stormed the barn for the final time. Gunshots echoed against the walls. Screams tore through the fog. The brothers moved unnaturally fast, climbing walls, crawling across ceilings, attacking like animals. One by one, the sheriff's men fell. The sheriff himself followed the sounds of crying to the hayloft. There he found the last two surviving women tied to beams. As he cut them free, he heard footsteps on the roof. The brothers dropped down from above, smiling, eyes glowing. But before they could strike, the entire barn, old, dry, soaked with lantern fuel, caught fire from an overturned lamp. Flames roared upward like the barn itself wanted vengeance. The women escaped. The sheriff escaped. The brothers did not. Their screams mixed with the cracking wood as the roof collapsed. When the fire died, the ashes revealed two charred shapes curled into each other. But where their shadows fell, small footprints circled the remains. Dozens of them, then, disappeared into the cornfield. The sheriff never returned. The women left town and never spoke of it again. And the barn's land? No one farms it. No one lives near it. Because sometimes, late at night, people say they hear crying from beneath the soil, and something moving through the corn, searching for the next harvest. If you made it this far, then you now know the truth the state of Missouri tried to bury for more than a century. The Farmer Brothers weren't legends or rumors or ghost stories whispered to scare children. They were real men who walked among their neighbors with smiles, who shook hands at the local market, who prayed in church every Sunday. Even as their barn overflowed with shadows no sunlight could ever purify, 42 women lost their voices forever inside those walls. And every creak of old wood you hear on a lonely country road, every abandoned barn you pass at night, you'll remember what can happen when monsters learn to hide in plain sight. Thank you for watching Forgotten Remains, where we drag the buried horrors of history back into the light. If you want more stories like this, unchained, unfiltered, and unforgettable, make sure you stay with us, because some stories are too dark to die, and we are just getting started.